And we're back. You're listening to the Talkin' Boxing with Billy C show. Glad you could join us. Don't forget about my book. That's right, Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. It's available right now where all good books are sold, and you could literally get a copy of it right now if you go to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. Now, you can also get the electronic versions, Kindle and Nook. It's available right now. It's a great book, not just for boxing fans. It's a piece of American history. It's a piece of boxing history, and it's a piece of black history. And it's a great time to get a copy of the book because we're in the middle of Black History Month. Get a copy of Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet today. And I mean today. And while you're at it, get a couple of spare copies, too. It's that time again.
Blast from the past. We shine the spotlight again on fighters from years past.
Marciano, top ranking. Joe Louis is the leading contender.
Joe Frazier with a left hook. Good right hand thrown by Foreman that time.
Look at that left hook. Belt that goes to Ray Mancini.
It's Blast from the Past on Talkin' Boxing.
And this week's Blast from the Past, which is being sponsored by KOFantasyBoxing.com, features a former world champion and boxing Hall of Famer, Panama Al Brown. And joining me right now to tell us all about Panama Al Brown is my man, Alex Pierpaoli. What's up, brother?
Good evening, Billy C. How are you?
I'm doing okay, man. It's a couple of slow weeks in boxing. I mean, when you look at all of the schedule that we had really last year, as a whole, and what we got coming up this year in the next few weeks, it seems like, what a dead time, these last couple of weeks. But things pick up next week, and we'll be back busier than ever. And thank God we got guys like Panama Al Brown to talk about during the Blast from the Past segment.
That's right. This is it's a lull. I think we're in the middle of a lull.
Yeah, well, it's just a lull for the month. It's just this month. We February 27th starts off with some good fights too, and then it just gets progressively better. I mean, you can't ask. I mean, look at the three big fights we got coming up with, of course, Porter, Thurman, and then Pacquiao Bradley. 3, and then, of course, Canelo Khan. I mean, 3 big fights 1 month away from each other. So, and then all the other big fights that are sprinkled in between it's pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, maybe I wonder if it does happen every year, if there's like a Super Bowl lull,
Well, that's what happens in sports. I mean, after the Super Bowl, it's a big, for sports fans, it's like, oh, man, you don't have, there's nothing. Well, if you're a basketball fan, you got March Madness and basketball and hockey right now, but typically, the wives like the month of February and March until the first pitch in April, But,
right.
Anyway, Panama Al Brown. Interesting cat, huh?
Yeah, definitely. This is a pretty cool character. And this guy, in terms of firsts, I believe he is, I was trying to verify it, but I believe he is the first black champion, bantamweight champion. And he actually...
Well, he's considered the first Latino world champion.
He's Hispanic, Latino, as well as black. But it's interesting because the American papers really just consider him a Negro. I mean, they just consider him colored. That's their words of the age, and that was part of why it was difficult for him to get fights here. But like other fighters of color, he had some great success overseas, especially in Paris. But yeah, Panama Al Brown. His birth name actually was Alfonso Teofilo Brown, born July 5th, 1902, in Colón, Panama. He is one of 3 kids, and as I said, he's biracial. His father was a husky Western miner, and his mom was of Caribbean African descent. She was tall and willowy frame, and that must have been he must take after his mother, because One of the things about this man is he probably was downright freakish, and that is the way they described him. He was 5'11", almost nearly 6 feet tall, fought at 118 pounds.
I know.
Some of the descriptions of him were just plain, sometimes they were complimentary, especially I would imagine watching him fight was probably pretty impressive because he could keep you out there with a jab and then really smash you with the right. And he can control, pretty much all the bantams of his age with that right reach. It was a heavyweight's reach, 76-inch reach. The descriptions were things like he was a grotesque assemblage of pipe stem limbs. Sometimes it was complimentary, like an ebony coat hanger or a long licorice stick. But yeah, he started boxing. He went into the Boy Scouts. He grew up in the Panama Canal zone. When the Panama Canal, the U.S. military was stationed there, supervising construction, and he saw American GIs boxing, and he got into it and started boxing. He started out as a flyweight, and soon, got pretty talented at it. Smuggled his way as a stowaway to New York City, and on a fruit boat, and actually started learning, started boxing in Kid Norfolk, the great light heavyweight, his gym and that's where he found a trainer and started boxing as a pro, and was within a year was top ranked by the Ring magazine. They looked at him as one of the best bantamweights in the sport, and even Tex Rickard thought very highly, promoter Tex Rickard.
When you look at this guy, one thing sticks out with me. He fought everybody, no, as we say, whatever. But one thing sticks out is a lot of these fighters, especially from this era and earlier, start out at such a young age. And he actually didn't. He turned pro at 20 years old, just about 20 years old. And he fought for 20 years. What's amazing about him, to me, and some of the points that you make about his height, being at 5'11", almost 6 feet tall, and a 76-inch reach. This guy, once he got in the flow of being a professional, he pretty much fought his entire career at the bantamweight level. I mean, even as he moved on towards the end of his career, after 20, he was in the boxing business as a pro for 20 years. He was still fighting at the bantamweight level, which is amazing. I mean, you wonder if that's even physically possible. I mean, how does he maintain that weight as he aged? It seems freakish.
Yeah, it is amazing to think that he was able to stay, keep making weight. It just shows you that some guys, they, do it like Larry was just saying. It's it's a lifestyle, and some guys do commit to it, and make that weight. Now, the thing about it is, of course, as his career went on, that became harder. He did fight guys that were heavier too than him in order to try to get fights, and he eventually, in order to, because people just plain avoided him. I mean, he had a style. He was defensive and like a stylist, so there were times that he could stink it out. So not only did he have the strike against him that he was a black fighter in Jim Crow America. There was times, like I said, he could be less than thrilling to watch, and even in Paris, it got to a point where after his sort of his skills eroded a bit, and he wasn't as beloved, that they looked to see him win. People went to see him lose. It was that kind of a thing. A little bit like Al Bummy Davis, or there was a bit that not that he played a heel, but that people did want to see him lose. There were a few of his fights towards the end of his career. There were actual riots afterwards where he got the decision, and fans stormed the ring and actually roughed him up, where he went to the hospital actually with more injuries from the crowd than from his opponent. Yeah, he definitely. I mean, Billy C. I mean, this was one of those guys. Like, I like battling Siki. He was a guy who, in his prime, when he had that career after he was having a hard time getting fights in New York, he went to Paris, and you see there where he had that string of wins there. He was like a real flamboyant man about town, fine dresser. He was in all the jazz clubs and the bars, like battling Siki. He liked the nightlife, and Paris loved him.
He should have, if he was going to hang out like that, he should have found a couple of newspaper boys to hang out with him to protect him. You know how badass those guys are.
That's right.
Anybody that's new to this segment, Alex and I have discovered through several years of doing, actually we've been doing the Blast from the Past for a long time, and one thing we've discovered is that you don't mess with newspaper boys and shoe shine guys. They used to have to fight for their territories. But anyway, Panama Al Brown fought some pretty notable characters throughout his career, didn't he?
Yeah, and some of them he had some quick knockouts. He had one knockout that was basically a 15-second knockout, one of the quickest KOs there against, it was the Gustav Humery, and then they ended up, it was Gustav Humery, and they ended up having a series of bouts. One of them ended up in a riot later. But he also had a win over Emil Spider Pladner. These were some of the best fighters of the day. Battling Battalino, another guy we did a Blast from the Past on. Newsboy Brown was another fighter that he tangled with. Speedy Dado. These were some of the top fighters of the age.
Eugene Creaky.
He had a win over him.
Yeah, in France. Harry Corbett, another big win over him. He fought several fights against Eugene Hoyt. I don't know how you pronounce that name, Huat. I would have said Hart, but I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. He had a bunch of fights against him who, he was a big name. One question I want, Freddie Miller, Pete Sanistol, Young Perez, several fights with him. But one fight sticks out for me, and it's more of I'm trying to figure out the timeline, but in 1941, he fought Battling Nelson. That can't be the same Battling Nelson, right?
No, it isn't. It's just a guy, how they had lots of guys who would, as an homage, take the same name as another. Yeah,
because he would have been like 60 years old, but you never know. And the thing is, he did retire and make a comeback in 1930. After 1935, he kind of was out of the ring for a couple of years and resumed his career in 37. So unlike some of the other guys that we've talked about, he did kind of retire and then come back, but he still was fairly successful, even though he was way past his prime.
Yeah, he was, and while he was in France, actually, I should also mention that he was romantically linked to the French poet and filmmaker Jean Cocteau, and who actually managed his career for a while. We have Oscar Valdez, who's the first openly gay boxer. We've done Blast from the Past on Emil Griffith, who was, he was not openly gay, but he was bisexual, and that's come out, since.
Was it Oscar? Wait. Was it Oscar Valdez? No, I don't think it was him. I think it was.
What's the guy's name?
Well, Oscar Valdez isn't he the undefeated guy? It wasn't him. It was the other one, but he's not
undefeated. Something. I thought it was. I don't know. But I apologize to Oscar Valdez.
Oscar, calm down, Oscar. Calm down, Oscar Valdez. We don't think it was
anything wrong with it.
Yeah, not that there's anything wrong with that.
Panama Al Brown. So that was another reason. At one point, the NABA, the National Boxing Association, or whatever the hell the acronym is there. But they partly stripped him of his title, in part because he hadn't defended it against, somebody they named as the challenger. But the other thing was that it also kind of like a vote against his lifestyle.
Yeah, it's Cruz.
But again, he was not. You could not, of course, be openly gay at this age.
It was Orlando Cruz was the name.
Orlando Cruz.
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't know where I got Oscar
Louis from LA is flipping out. Not what? Oscar Valdez is gay? No. But not that there's anything wrong. It was Orlando
Cruz.
Right.
My bad.
Okay, but anyway, I didn't know that he was. And an interesting thing about Panama Al Brown is after all the fights that he had, a total of 164 total fights, he was never stopped. Which I think is pretty amazing, especially during that time. I think it might show that, I know it's a different weight class, but it kind of is reminiscent of today's heavyweight division, where you have a guy who's so much bigger and can use that height and reach advantage, as a major advantage in a fight. Maybe that's why fighters couldn't get to Panama Al Brown. He was known for not wasting energy during a fight. They say he would never waste a drop of energy, that he would very rarely get tired, which is kind of amazing too.
Yeah, he was extremely talented defensively, and that probably was he was probably able to keep people away from his chin, that he was just never stopped. He was one of those fights. He like I said, there was the fight where he ended up with a concussion from fans, and that there was two in a row. One was the Kid Francis bout, and then the other one was the Gustav Humery fight, where they were just. They didn't like his style. It was like some of Paris turned on his in-ring persona, and that was where he ended up with a concussion just because of the crowd roughing him up. And that was where one of the judges, and this is something I tell you, it's almost you kind of want this to happen after some bad scorecards on Friday Night Fights. The crowd actually roughed up one of the judges and ripped his scorecard, ripped it to shreds right in front of him. There's been many nights where Teddy Atlas kind of encouraged that kind of a thing.
and we complain about a couple of corrupt sanctioning body leaders, and back then, if God forbid you were a judge that filled out the wrong card, right? I mean, geez. But interesting stuff about Panama Al Brown. After his career, he fronted an orchestra. Tell us about that. Did you find that out?
Yeah, he actually was very talented. He knew 3 languages. He spoke Spanish and French fluently, and he learned English. When he came here. Before he came here, he must have started learning it in along with his career, because he started learning English, I guess, as a grown man. But he could play multiple instruments. He did have. He was not only was he as popular as Josephine Baker, but he had his own cabaret for a while. A cabaret show where he would tap dance. He sang, but some of the reviews were not that great of his singing. He played an instrument. And then he also, there was times where he would do jump rope. He would skip rope to an orchestra.
So basically, he would just be quoted as saying, "I just want to dance. I just want to dance."
Well, I think the thing about it, part of it is that it's a great fighter doing a lounge act, a cabaret. So I think as his ring star started to wane, his stardom in the ring waned. So did the cabaret. Think about it. If a boxer that's doing really well does a show, you can put up with it. But as he starts to tank it in the ring, you're willing to put up with less.
Right.
And I think that from what it sounds like, that's what it seemed to be. One thing that was interesting is like the theme we've had here of several fighters in a row, cocaine plays a part in his destruction. He claimed to get addicted to it as a painkiller for a lot of the aches and pains that came with training, and maybe that was, I'm sure that does take a lot on the body to maintain such a light physique for such a long time.
You don't eat. You don't eat. His appetite was. It's interesting about that. He was arrested. He had an arrest record in New York City for being popped for cocaine. And I was trying to get the timeline when, because cocaine originally was in Coca-Cola, but that must have been 20 years before, So he was arrested in New York for cocaine use, not selling or anything like that, but I guess possession. And it was he was supposed to be deported out of the states, but I guess the judge changed his mind and gave him a different sentence, and he wasn't deported. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But as is the case with a lot of these fighters, he ended up without a nickel, huh?
Yeah, he sure did. And there was actually a couple of things that there was that period there. If you look at his record, all of 1940, he's inactive, and that seems where a lot of the legal troubles and the cocaine arrests and stuff, and that potential deportation occurred. Because I actually have an article here in July from the Pittsburgh Courier, where he was actually fighting for his life in a hospital. He had gotten in a argument, in a fight with someone in a bar, and he was actually stabbed. And but he did recover, and then he does return to Panama for a little while and have a few more fights. But he at this point he was dissipated. His style really depended on his mobility and reflexes, and the wheels weren't what they were. And so he picked up 2 losses and a draw out of 4 fights in Panama. I'm sorry, out of 6 fights in Panama, and there was actually he ends up passing away of tuberculosis. Evidently, he had passed out on the street. People thought that he had just fainted, but I guess it was due to the advanced tuberculosis. And by the time they got to the hospital, there wasn't too much they could do, and he died there.
48 years old, penniless. It's a familiar, sad story that we've heard with boxing, and it's a shame, especially with such a high caliber fighter like Panama Al Brown.
And one of the things also that this was not any fault of his own, but he had made a tremendous amount of money, and had put it away in property. He owned $250,000 worth of property in the French countryside. Well, he ended up losing it through no fault of his own. It was the Nazis marched into France and occupied France, and he had to leave. It was no place for a half Latino, half African gay guy. Even if you were one of the best bantamweights on earth.
Really? The Nazi Germans didn't like that kind of stuff? Or?
Yeah, the Nazis weren't too fond of that.
No, I guess unless he had blonde hair and blue eyes, I guess that was the end of that, huh? But
yeah, so he ended up losing almost. And if you think about that, and I guess I didn't see that he ever got it back. So I would think that either they just confiscated it, or maybe it was just trashed in the war, because the war was there on French soil. So
that is a shame, because here you have a guy that seemingly does does a couple of smart things with his money, and he still dies penniless.
Yeah, think of that, $250,000. Almost $280,000 in 1939. How much is that worth? That's probably a lot.
It's a couple $1 million easily. Easily. Yeah. Anyway, title bout championship computer game. You put Panama Al Brown in with our bantamweight champs. How did he do?
Yes, I did. I put him in against Shinsuke Yamanaka. And when they fought the first time in a 12-rounder, Panama Al Brown won by an 11th round knockout. He stopped Yamanaka at 221 of the 11th. He did have him down in the 5th and the 7th. And but it was interesting on the cards. The cards were even 5-5 in rounds, but with the 2 knockdowns, Brown was way ahead. Brown had been warned for a low blow in the 2nd. Then when they fight 100 times, Panama Al Brown gets the better of him. He goes 81 victories, 15 defeats, 4 draws, with 29 stoppages. And of Yamanaka's 15 victories, he scored 7 knockouts of Panama Al.
Well, he did. He ended up doing better than you thought, or not?
I think so. I think that makes sense. I think in any era, BoxRec has him ranked as number 2 all time. Ibro has him ranked number 2 all time. Right behind, both of them are right behind Ader Joffrey. Burt Randolph Sugar, in his book Boxing Greatest Fighters, he has him 65th all-time greatest. He was, his physique and those reflexes and the power he had. I think at any era that's going to do very, very well.
Yeah, no doubt. Panama Al Brown, this week's blast from the past. He was a former world bantamweight champion. He had a career record, total fights, 164. Now, he won 129 with 59 knockouts. He lost 19. He had 13 draws. He also fought in a newspaper decision era where he picked up another couple of wins and 1 loss. He never was stopped in all 164 fights. He fought for about 20 years. And like Alex said, he passed away in 1951 at 48 years old. Panama Al Brown was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1992. And he was our blast from the past this week. Great job as usual, Alex. And as usual, we're going to take a short break, and you're going to stick around for a couple of minutes, right?
Yes, and my apologies to Oscar Valdez. Not that there's anything wrong with it.
No, and Orlando Cruz is just very happy that we got it right, because he is very proud.
He deserves it, right?
Right.
He deserves it, because even today, it's a hard thing for a boxer to be honest about.
Right, and it's hard for anybody to be honest. I guess it's not that hard anymore. I mean,
Not as hard in greater society, but in boxing, sure.
But that's for another show that we'll talk about some other time.
That's
But
right.
Listen, we're going to take a short break, and when I come back, I got some other things I wanted to get Alex Pierpaoli's opinion on. So we'll both be back in 2.